Welcome to another episode of Vision and Light. And today I have two incredible people with me. One is my very good friend, Bruce Percy, who many of you will have known from previous episodes. And the new person on the stage today is Renee Algesheimer, who is the brain behind a book project that both Bruce and I were invited to be part of. And we don't just want to talk about the book today, but we also want to talk about the whole creative process in terms of why we make photographs in the first place, and not to put the cart before the horse and think about the product first, but instead to think about the creative process, why we do these things, what it is we're trying to express, what benefits that brings to our lives, and hopefully the lives of others when we're sharing our observations of reality. So a big warm welcome to Bruce and Renee. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, nice to be here again, Alistair. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you're in the International Space Station.
That's right. And I've got my nice warm
somewhere
jumper on
warmer
today.
than Edinburgh.
Oh yes, God, it's like -10 here today, which isn't really that cold, but I suppose it's the coldest winter we've had in Scotland for quite some time. So
Supposedly. And Renee, pleasure. You're in Morocco.
I'm paying attribute to the FIFA Soccer World Championship. And so for that, I'm sitting right under the sun, enjoying the desert. And absolutely, very nice being here. Thanks a lot, Alistair, for the invitation.
It's really ironic because you and I have been corresponding for a couple of years easily. And this is actually the first time we've had a conversation. So thanks, YouTube, for the motivation to do that. Right. So like I said at the beginning, Renee has been the brainchild or brain behind the brainchild. How does that work? Has been the brain behind the process of putting together a book where you've pulled together a very diverse set of creative photographers and pulled it all into one place. And it's a really quite remarkable project. Why did you want to do this? Is the first obvious question, I think.
So I'd say there are probably three different motivations that put me into that project. So the first was that a kind of dissatisfaction with the status quo of where landscape photography is and how it is perceived. I've come to recognize that on social media, there are so many images that look almost similar of iconic places. And I personally I missed the soul, the depth, and the trigger points, and that make me look twice. And with this book, I wanted to show that there are also other photographers, artists who really carefully think, who are well connected to their inner selves, who have an intent that they try to express through their visual work. And so that is basically a statement towards creativity in landscape photography. So that was my first intent. Second was a personal form of gratitude. So I started with my own photography quite late in 2015. And so in these kind of 7 years, I've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot through people like you both who inspired me, who inspired my own path. So I have many personal connections to many of the photographers in the book. And with Bruce, for example, I went on a workshop in 2016. And it was at the Isle of Aik. And what I especially liked about that workshop, that the whole week workshop was in one place. It was not about traveling around. It was not about going from one iconic spot to another, but it was really about learning the landscape. It was about learning the waves, the light, and the landscape, seeing the patterns. And so that influenced me a lot. And I was super impressed. I mean, I started 2015, and in 2016, I asked Bruce if he could sit together with me and giving me some feedback on my personal images.
I've got no memory of this at all.
And we sat down in the kitchen, and he gave me a lot of personal feedback. And so that really influenced me in the way I see the world and the landscape world. Your channel, for example, Alistair, with the interviews have been super broadening it up for me, the whole landscape area. I'm listening to the intent of other photographers and understanding their why was also very important to me. And so with that, I thought that before COVID, and that is the third intent, by the end of 2019, I recognized that probably the pandemic is coming. And because of that, many photographers may be forced to stop going on their workshops. And so basically, they lost a lot of their major income. And so my personal thought was, how can I contribute in a way of saying thank you to all these artists that have influenced my life by creating a book and that gives attention to these different photographers, to these artists, to their creative work, but also giving royalties back, which was basically the main motivation to doing that in a self-publishing process, which would have been impossible with a publisher. So those are the three main motivations of the book.
Before I jump on to you, Bruce, with this, because I'm sure you've got your observations about being part of that process as well. But one of the things that's really strongly motivating me these days is recognizing the importance of other people's work. Now, I don't actually look at a huge amount of other photography these days. That may sound odd or almost egotistic or arrogant, but I think it's very easy for us to become polluted by other creatives. But equally, when I do look at it, I never cease to be amazed and inspired and motivated, not to copy or to paraphrase what they're trying to do, but just in that understanding that creativity is a limitless and boundless thing. We rarely scratch the surface of our own creativity. And I think one of the great things about seeing the work from other people is understanding, well, wait a minute, I could go so much deeper than where I am right now. And it gives you the confidence to do that. And one of the things I try and do with my own work is to showcase the work of other people, whether it's having Bruce on or Adam Gibbs or, Mark Adamus or whoever it might be, is to recognize the impact that these people are making to the creative process. So I think, what you're trying to do here, Renee, is incredible. And the way the book has been put together with us all answering dozens and dozens and dozens of questions about what creativity is to us and the whole creative process, it has incredible depth because it's an incredibly diverse project. Every single one of us is giving different answers and different perspectives, and it means different things to us. And I think that celebration of individuality is an incredibly important thing. Because Bruce and I are very different photographers. We're people. We have very different personalities. We have very different motivations. We could get together and have a few pints, and I'm sure we would enjoy that very much because we're Scottish. But at the end of the day, we express ourselves creatively in very, very different ways, even in the same place, whether we're on Egg or on the Isle of Harris or the Isle of Lewis or up in Torridon or on Iceland. We're expressing ourselves in different ways because we have different things to say. So I do hugely value that celebration of uniqueness. And I think this is what you're saying, the antithesis of social media, where social media is almost wanting to homogenize and standardize and sort of make popular. And it's the same in the music charts. Popular music is similar. Popular photography is similar.
There are a couple of things that I'd like to touch on that you've just mentioned there, Alistair. First of all, giving thanks. I think as a creative person, if you're in touch with the kind of inspiration or the sources of inspiration that you've had or the influences that you've had, if you're in touch with that and you're realistic about it, I think that just makes you much more honest in your art as well. I think it just means you're more grounded as well. For years, I mean, it's no secret to anybody that knows anything about me that I'm a big Michael Kenna fan. And I used to say to people for years, I'm just a Michael Kenna clone, and I can see all the parallels of where my work's come from and I think it's important, and it's very important to give credit to it. It's very important to mention it and to name check it and to talk about that. So one of the things I've always found quite funny about the social media thing is that somebody will post a picture, but they won't say like, oh, this is like my version of Tunnel View by Ansel Adams or something, you know. And to somebody uninitiated, they'll look at that and say, oh, that's a fantastic picture. And it probably is a beautiful picture, but they don't know about the background influence or inspiration from that. And I think that's kind of important, just even just on a sort of personal level, just to be able to understand where you're coming from and why you are where you are. I'm also very similar to you in the way that I don't tend to look at anybody else's work these days. And when I was in IT and I had all my evenings and stuff like that, I'd come home and I would trawl through all these websites and everything. And the problem is when this becomes like your kind of, I don't really like to think of it as a job more. I like to think of it as more like a sort of calling, if you like. But it takes up all your time. And so what I do these days is you need to recharge yourself. So when I come home from trips and workshops, I don't look at anybody's work anymore. It's just, and I do think there's something possibly slightly insular and not very constructive about that. But I also think that you mentioned about this idea about the pollution aspect of it. I think that's so true, is that you can get, so one of the things I think is a problem at the moment is people are seeing so many pictures of something before they've even gone there. And that's really hard, just to go there with a complete clean slate and just to be able to experience it the way that you want to experience it. And one thing I really liked about Rennie's book was he did seem to be trying to look at photographers that were not just taking that classic shot. There was the real individualism there. The Benjamin Everett, for in particular for me, was one of the ones, page 171, everything is fluid, just blew my mind when I saw it. And I suppose the last thing, just based on what you were saying there, is it's about looking for individuality now. I've been saying to people in workshops now that I remember years ago in the days of film, you were just so grateful if you got a nicely exposed picture on a roll of film and maybe a good composition with it too, then you were getting somewhere. But I think I think a lot of people can get to that level now of nicely composed pictures that are well exposed. So that's no longer something really, in my view, that's something to really, really strive for anymore. That's like almost a given. And so now what I think everybody should be sort of trying to look for is just some, individuality in the work, so that what makes you stand that 5 or 2 or 3% above everybody else around you. And I'm not talking about it from a competition point of view, just a way of just how do you separate yourself from everybody else about what you're doing. And photography should be personal expression anyway. It should be about this kind of individuality. So that was what I picked up from your comments there about giving thanks. I am slightly insular, and this individuality, and I think the individuality comes sometimes, I think, from the insularity a little bit too. I remember, I hate to mention David Ward in case I've got this wrong, but I remember David Ward said something very similar along those lines quite some time ago, and I think people gave him a bit of a hard time about it at the time. But I get what he was talking about. You've not really got much else bandwidth or space in your own life for looking at too much other work when you're so engrossed in what you're doing because you've found your own thing. I think that's where that's coming from. So with Rennie's book, it's kind of interesting for me because I thought he kept saying to me, I kept getting the emails from him, and I was like, well, yeah, whatever. This will never happen. I was just thinking, the man's determined. The man's determined, and then it actually turned up about a week ago, and I sort of it was delivered to my mum's house because I'm never here, and I was at my mum's house, and 2 hours went by. My head was buried in it, and I was just thinking, I haven't done this in a long time. Really, just look through other people's work because I didn't even know. I don't really know. Alistair, I don't really know your work, and so I saw your work in there. I thought it was beautiful. And then Mark Adamus, I know from a very long time ago. Ruben Wu, fantastic, because I think Ruben Wu, in my view, is just somebody that's doing something incredibly unique at the moment. And there was a few other names in there of people that I hadn't heard of that I just really, really loved looking at. And it, from Alistair's point of view about this idea of just getting inspiration, I'm not really intent in trying to go and copy what they do or mimic what they do, and that's something that Alistair said as well. But it's just so encouraging to see that, um, in some respects, when you look at some of the social media platforms, you feel that photography is becoming extremely derivative, and I think it's because the algorithms just show up the things that are the most common, the most popular.
Exactly.
And so if you're doing something that's a little bit really unusual or different, you're probably going to get buried. And I'm not talking about myself or anything like that. I'm just talking about anybody out there that's doing something that maybe is a real niche isn't going to be discovered on those things. So somebody coming out with this kind of platform where they're deciding that they're wanting to sort of showcase a bunch of photographers, I thought was extremely giving of Rennie. I was thinking to myself when I picked up the book, because it's an absolute beast of a book, and it's about 500 pages, and I was just thinking, I don't know, I dread to think how much it must have cost you to print this. And I suppose the thing I'd like to ask you is, you said in the beginning of the book that you said that this is the end of the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And when it forced me to go off and to look at your website too to see what you were doing, and I thought your work was quite accomplished, and I was starting to think, I think there's going to be more books coming from Rennie. So it feels to me like this is something you had to get off your chest.
Thanks a lot, and it's really it's very kind to hear these words from you. And I have to say that I haven't published my new work from the last year at all, from the last 2 years probably, because I felt that I've also through the process I've realized that I need to stop everything that I'm doing, and because I felt that my own work wasn't in line with my inner self, if that makes any sense. So I think
possibly believe that makes sense.
there's a quote by Paul Kenny from the book, and who said that he doesn't like the word "to photograph" because actually it puts the medium before the message. And I think what I did, and what probably all of us do in the beginning, that we put the emphasis on the medium, on the technology. So we learn everything about composition, about color, light, whatever. And but we don't really emphasize the message. And I realized that was true for myself. And so I'm very consequent in this situation. So I stopped everything. And so I've never published any single image on Instagram in the last year. And so I'm working a lot on my projects, but now I feel that they are much more aligned with who I am as a person and what I can say. And basically the main trigger for that was that I decided this summer to go to a creative retreat in the mountains, and I'm on sabbatical at the moment. So that means I only have to do research. So there's no teaching and no administration involved. And so I rented a mountain hut in the Swiss mountains at roughly 2,000 meters. That was completely isolated, no electricity, no connectivity. It was just me for 2 months. And I put some musical instruments with me. I'm also a musician like you both are. And a lot of books, a lot of paper to write, and my camera. That was everything. But it was completely unintentional. So I didn't have any goal, any objectives. I just wanted to listen into what emerges from the inside. And that has changed everything for me. And so I'm really now working on the new work. But I think this is also something that is true for many who are being on social media, who are using the camera, who look more. It's easier to watch one tutorial after another than just sit down and go through the deep valleys of your own personality, be challenged by your own constraints, and come up with something that is very honest and very vulnerable, because it tells your story and not someone else's story.
I think that's where Alistair's coming from about this word. The word that he used was polluted, or distraction. In my view, is these things can sometimes get in the way when you're looking too much at what everybody else is doing. You're kind of looking over your shoulder all the time, and you're kind of second guessing, or you're comparing yourself, and it's one of the hardest things. And I think everybody does it. And certainly at the beginning, I think I think it's also very difficult for most of us to find out, what our voice is, because maybe we've got this inkling to come and do photography, but we don't know why. I had a girl on a trip this year with me, and she was originally she loves just photographing street photography, but she decided to come on this landscape trip with me. And I said to her, "So what? There must be some sort of spark there that's driving you to do this." And she couldn't answer it. And I think that's fine if you can't answer it. It's just obviously there's some subconscious drive there that she's not aware of yet. And she came back to do the same trip. It was the egg trip. She did it twice. She did it in April, and she came back in September, and it was just like watching somebody just taking off. And you could see that she had it. There was something there. So in my view, although she consciously wasn't aware of it, there was something inside her that was telling her to do this, to go down that path, and she was following it. So in my view, it was like she was kind of listening to those inner voices or inklings that were telling her what to do. And that's what we should all be doing, I think, is just listening to the hunches that we have. The hunch that just makes you think that I think I'll just go out in the camera today, or I think I'll just go and see that at the cinema, or whatever, that sort of thing. And I am really worried that when you start off now, there's just so much information out there that you can get buried in it, and you can get lost in it. And I think that one of the skills that we have to develop now is actually being sort of like a critical reviewer of feedback. So you can be bruised by somebody telling you they don't like your photograph. And in my view, I think that not all criticism is valid, and not all criticism is well delivered, because most of the people who are delivering it don't know how to give constructive criticism. So there's that. But also, it's more about listening to the things that when somebody says something to you that you just know straight away, they say something to you that you've just never heard before, and you just think, oh my goodness, wait a minute, it's like a bell going off, That to me is valid criticism, and the rest of it, it's either just you're not ready for it, or it's just not applicable to you. So you have to become very critical about, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but critical thinking about, you have to sort of evaluate the criticism you get given, and not just take it all on board. And when you're putting yourself out there and you're putting yourself on these platforms and things, especially with the like counts, I wish the like counts weren't there, because everybody's just this degree of got to keep driving the numbers and stuff like that. This sort of thing, that's not what it should be about. Anyway, sorry, I've gone off at a tangent.
No, I agree with everything you're saying, and I think anybody who objectively looks at the contemporary scene, how photography has evolved as an expressive art form, and how we can use it, and I mean use, how we can use creativity, how we can use the creative process, because it's a catalyst and a metaphor for our own development. And this is the great thing with all art forms, whether it's music or dance or the performing arts of any way, or any creative arts, whether painting or pottery or whatever it might be, is that if you just generically produce the same as everybody else, you're not actually growing as a human, and society is driving the zeitgeist of what you should be doing to a certain extent.
Sorry, Alistair.
Well, I was just going to say that, one of the things about the book is it's so clear from the plethora of diverse photographers there that if art mirrors life, then what we are seeing is a diversity of life choices. We're seeing a diversity of expressive choices.
Yes.
It's a celebration of diversity. It's not a celebration of homogeny. And that's one of the things I've always been conscious of from a book producing project at all, whether it's, I bought a number of your books, for example. Thank you very much for just buying mine. But when you buy a book from one person, it can become, oh, yes, I've seen that now. There's a certain repetitiveness of message, of perspective, of theme. And it takes a really skillful photographer to engage a viewer page after page after page, where they feel as if they're peeling back layer upon layer upon layer of depth and personality and perspective. And what René has done by pulling together such a substantial number of artists is every single page is discovery. Every single page is a change of perspective and a change of direction and a change of energy. And I think that's what makes it such an incredible project.
Yeah, and asking the same questions. Initially, when he wrote to me and he gave me the questionnaire thing, I thought, no, this is not the way to do this. Of course, I knew, I suppose that was one thing that over the last week or two when I've been looking at the book was I was thinking it's so interesting because it's the same question, same set of questions everybody get asked, but they all answer it very differently. And I was kind of worried at the time when he wrote to me about this set of questions that he clearly thought about, that there wasn't really much room for, leaving that if you wanted to. But I think it's quite clear that when you look at some of them, some of the entries in there, there's a lot of, some photographers talk an awful lot, and there's an awful lot of them that don't say very much. I'm definitely much more on the a couple of lines sort of thing. But
I'll tell you, I'll give you a little secret here, and for anyone watching this video who's got this far, I answered all my questions and got an email straight back from René saying, no, you can do better than this.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh goodness. Well, I had a second go at it. I just felt the first time I wrote it, I don't know. I think I was just being a bit too terse about everything, and went back and just decided that I think I had to be a little bit more softer about the whole thing. Because in some respects, I just feel that there's so much judgment and evaluation and everything's, and in my view, and I just think society in general is all about rating, status. Everything's status driven or success or failure driven, and with photography, it's very much, for me, that's one of the things with that shouldn't even come into the equation personally.
The way I kind of look at it, and then very, very shortly I'm going to be handing over to René to talk more about the production of the book and that process. I'm just going through the process of producing my own book and know an awful lot of these pitfalls. And Bruce, of course, has produced many books already. But I think it'd be useful for viewers to watch some of that process in terms of what actually goes into that. But before we get to that, I think one of the things I just want to point out again is I wake up every morning and my biggest fear is being average. And that's not an egotistical, I am better than people type of thing. It's an aspiration for me, is what is the best thing I can do today? What is the best way I can express my individuality and my passion for life and the landscape and the people I love and the people I care about? How can I make today as good as possible? And I heard some terrible news just before I came online today, which is why I'm drinking a beer. I'm actually self-medicating because I heard some terrible news about a very dear friend of mine. And art and creativity is a celebration of our time that we have, this finite amount of time that we're walking on this planet, appreciating its beauty and its nuances and its nature and its change and it's the savage elements that we deal with, like in the west of Scotland when it's horizontal sheep, as the sheep are going across the landscape like tumbleweed in the Arizonan desert. We have this moment to celebrate our life, and I have nothing but admiration for René to herd so many cats to make them all deliver.
It must have been a thankless task, actually, because I think most creative people are just, I think we're all fairly self-obsessed in some way or other, I think, in all honesty, and I think that has to come. I've been saying to people for a while that if you're becoming good at being a good photographer or a good gymnast or something like that isn't just about doing lots more practice. There's usually a lot more sacrifice in there too. Other things give up. Other things are thrown out in order to push that. And it's possibly one of the aspects of it I think that's not so healthy. But so this idea of going off to chase all these people who are probably running off doing all their projects and everything all the time, I don't know how he did it, because I was pretty unobtainable half the time as well, and kept forgetting. He kept writing to me and saying, "Oh yeah, I'll get round to that today," and then 3 weeks would go by and I hadn't done it. I'm even surprised he actually got the book finished, to be honest, at all. And it's 500 pages.
And this is only Bruce and me. I mean, if everybody else was here on this Zoom session, we'd all be apologizing for being so tardy.
Just before we do go into René's thing, I'd like to just clarify one little thing that I think I might have come over slightly badly about. I don't have any problem with anybody going out to copy Ansel Adams tunnel view shots or do those iconic places. And I also think that there's real great benefit in walking in the footsteps of the photographs that you admire or like. And I think you can learn a lot from that. I suppose for me, I'm just thinking that at some point, what we're hoping that it's going to happen at some point in our own development is that we start to diverge off that path. And we just start to find more about who we are and why we're doing it, because I think it's there right from the beginning. I think that's my view. I think that's the whole reason why we pick up the camera.
Yeah, I think it's there before we learn.
Yeah,
it's there, and then we start learning, and then we start copying.
And copying is like it happens in everything. And it's like, if you think about musicians, you can go onto YouTube and there's tons of cover bands.
Yep.
And I was thinking about when I was at school, every year when the first years came in, these little 12-year-olds would go and hire the bass guitars and the guitars and drums from the music department. And then every year without fail, you'd hear House of the Rising Sun come through, because it's a great standard to learn. Yeah. So this thing about going, and it's something I used to be dead against actually on my workshops, was people actually wanting to go, if we were somewhere where somebody had seen one of my photographs and they said, "Can we go and set that up?" I didn't want to do it. I was much more interested in them just finding their own thing. And I do see value in it now, of just people just actually finding where it was. And oh my goodness, it's much smaller than I thought it was. I didn't realize the landscape was, and there was all this clutter around here. And all that stuff is very, very instrumental. But I just think, I just think that getting to this level now of starting to aim for, hopefully looking for more individuality in what we do is a good thing. So I don't want to sound like I'm being negative towards anybody who out there who's really happy about going and copying all these big iconic locations and things, because there's some great benefit in doing it. And hey, if you enjoy doing it, you enjoy doing it. That's absolutely.
Right, René, man. I'm going to hand over the screen to René so he can share a short PowerPoint presentation. All yours. You just take over for a little while, and then we'll carry on rambling.
Just jump in if you have any feedback or comment. I just wanted to say one word to you, Alistair, and what Bruce was also referring to. I think these days noise becomes our voice. So we have so many inputs from the outside, so that is very difficult to listen to the inside and to listen to our own intent, to find our own message. And so for me, it is very important that we control kind of the noise in order to be able to identify our own message and our own intent. And so that was also the main motivation for doing the book, probably. So I think that personally, I always try to not have too many objectives and to relax myself when it comes to objectives or expectations. And I just try to listen to the inside. I try to be modest and mediocre, and because then I'm able to hear my inner voice at its best, probably. I don't know if that makes any sense. So can you see the slides?
We can indeed.
Yes.
Just need to go to that mode. Okay, so welcome to a look into the book. So the book is called Voice of the Ice. And we haven't yet talked about the name and where the name comes from. And so for me, it is very important that I have recognized that there are many beautiful artists who have wonderful things to say and to share, but that chose the visual art medium in order to express themselves because they probably don't want to, or they cannot use kind of the words. And so then their images and photographs, they become really their voice. And so that's where the title and the idea of the title came from. So that's the book. It is really 3.6 kilogram, 526 pages, I think, and more than 120 images in the book. If you've told me, Bruce actually told me in the beginning, you could have easily made 3 books out of that. And if I knew kind of the logistic problems and the price for the distribution before, I would have done that probably.
I think that's common issue, Rennie, when doing our first book. I think I don't know anybody who doesn't, you know, I don't want to say you've overdone it, but it does look to me like I think this could have been a nice project of 3 books, definitely.
So Voice of the Ice is potentially also the introduction into a series. I don't know if I really want to repeat that in the next few years, but I'm still having lots of ideas of follow-up books. But before, I think I would like to look a little more into my own work. But actually, the book is a collection of interviews and with some, what I personally feel, exceptional landscape photographers. We can also talk a little bit later on about how I chose them. That's a slight description of the book and some photographs from the book. And so the book is made of very high quality matte fine art paper. On the paper decision, which was one of the many steps, it was very important for me to choose a paper that works well for the text, but also for the images. For the images, the challenge was really that we have a high variety of images. So we have images really that are very, very dark, and we have images that are almost blood red, like Freeman's one, for example, and that are very high contrast, very low contrast. And so to find the right paper for all of that was quite a challenge. So we have more than 120 images in the book, and we have actually a 30+1 interview in the book. Why 30+1? So I always thought I need to have a buffer, but everyone basically agreed to be part of the book, and so I ended up with 30+1.
So was your buffer 1? You thought one person might not do it?
You were the +1, Bruce.
I reckon I was just going to get there. Also, I reckon now. Yeah, I think you were extremely optimistic that you thought you were even going to get 30, and I'm actually surprised you got the full 30, to be honest, or 31.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit in a second how that happened. And so this is the list, an overview list of the artists in the book. And so, of course, when we talk about landscape photography, Marc Adamus was a choice, a very natural choice for me. But I also wanted to look into very creative processes like Valda Bailey and Sandra Bartoka are much more creative. They combine multiple exposure images, for example. And but if you look at the whole list of artists, and one intent from the beginning was to strive for diversity. And so I think I didn't successfully manage the diversity everywhere. Would have liked to have more female photographers, for example, and more geographical regions. And but the main reason why I ended up with this list is that it was a subjective selection from photographers that have inspired me in the last couple of years, and that I personally had an access to. So many of the photographers I know personally. So over the years of my own learning process, I went to workshops with Marc Adamus, for example, with Marcel van Osten, with Bruce. And so I know many of them personally, and many of them become really close to me, some even very close friends, like Rafael Rojas, for example. And so I found that through that personal connection, I was really able to tell a better story and to get a little bit more out of the personality. And my motivation was to let them shine through their individual chapters. What many of the artists in the book didn't expect, that I worked like a scientist who I am in real life. And that means I decided to apply a standardized interview. So that means in the beginning, I made a list of all the questions I was interested in. I grouped them, and then I made a decision on the 15 questions that were personally most attractive to me, that I wanted to use into the book. Why the standardized interview? Because the book delivers completely different ways of reading and access to the book. So, for example, you can look up into one artist and his perception of the world. You can also compare answers of different artists, for example, in order to understand how they differentially see the world and interpret it.
Mm.
And you can also use the images as a visual cue to understand the text. And there's much more in the book, also the favorite photo books of all the artists and many things. So that was the method that I decided to use. Then I sent out invitation emails to all the artists. And so when I received back then the final content, I reviewed it. And so what many of them didn't expect, so I added lots of questions, I corrected it, I modified it, and then I sent it back. So there are some artists in the list who received my feedbacks 4 or 5 times. And that was very unexpected to them. But for me, it was very important that I felt that I'm not yet there. So I wanted to get out more from them. And
the thing I'd like to sort of just interject there, sorry, very quickly, Rennie, was that I felt that initially it was my mum that got the book, and she said to me, "Oh, you're in it," she said, and she said, "Oh, there's only 2 pictures of yours in it." And when I when I turned up and had a look, I thought the amount of space that you gave everybody is quite a lot. I felt it's a good proportion in the way that I think there's about maybe 4 images per person. I thought that's a really good number. And you think you're reaching the end of the conclusion, or this is going to be the end of this chapter. You turn the page thinking that's you're done with this photographer, only to find you've got another couple of pages of more questions. And I thought that was nicely done too, because he started off with the questions are kind of more the kind of stuff that you'd expect to get at the beginning. And then if you're interested in this person, you've seen now 3 or 4 of these images, then in the last bit of it, you've got much more questions that felt they get a little bit deeper. And so I felt that they were all like mini books in their own right. And that's why I was kind of saying to you that, I felt in some respects this could have been easily a 3-book project. Everybody was given a lot of space, a lot of if this had been a magazine, I would have been blown away to get that amount of coverage, and also even in a book like this, I'm blown away to get this amount of coverage talking about it personally. Anyway, I think there's about 8-9 pages per photographer or something. I've not counted them, but
that is an average, yeah. So there are some who have probably 20, and some who have 5 or 6.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's about an average, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely because, if you've got somebody who's got a lot to say, you gave them that space, which was really nice too. And in my case, I was just trying to keep it really, I didn't want to get too convoluted about things. I just kept it short. But anyway, no, I just thought I thought the format was great. And it just seemed to flow really well, even considering the choice of the work of the photographers, because that could just almost not jar if the pictures aren't sequenced correctly. But the thing is, you've ordered the photographers based on their surname, and that was very interesting too, because maybe that helped in just mixing things up a bit more. And you're talking about the sort of the variety of work that was in there, because there was styles of photography that I wouldn't be personally into. There was a whole broad section of stuff in there. And the whole thing just had a really kind of almost like you could just open up anywhere and you would just get lost in it. So it was very good. I thought it worked very well.
To change my name to Aardvark, my surname.
Yes, yeah. well, that was well, you were well, Ben. You were right. You were pretty much at the front, and there's Ruben Wu. In my personal opinion, I think Ruben Wu's just an amazing artist, and he's kind of the last guy, which is actually a very nice way of finishing the book too, is to have somebody that I really rate the guy.
I think
And-
Ruben is really sorry. I
No,
think
sorry.
Ruben is really reaching out to a different form of photography, which is amazing. And so he's not arguing against AI photography or any other medium. So he's really trying to immerse himself into all the new opportunities, and he's creating something new out of that, which is amazing.
Yes, and I think it's good to sort of expand on that, because I now think that I sometimes wonder if we're in the golden age of photography. Maybe people of my age think that the golden age of photography was Ansel Adams or something, but I still think maybe we're still very much at the beginning, because like the photography and graphic design and stuff, they're so overlapping now. And the technologies. I know for a fact if Ansel Adams was still around now, he would be embracing it all. People seem to have this very kind of idea that he was this kind of purist. He was a magician, and I think he would have been delighted with all this stuff that's happening. I think we're living in a very kind of interesting time where there's just so much available to everybody now. And even as a starting, if you're 15 and you want to go and get a good camera now, it's dead easy to do.
Yeah.
You know, when I was 15, you were hankering at, like, you know, trying to get to medium format, you were just laughing. Nobody couldn't afford medium format, even in your 20s or 30s maybe. But so it's a very interesting and exciting time. And I think that the borders of what photography is are just, I think everybody's got to decide for themselves what it is, because, you know, there's certain things that I will and will not do, but it doesn't mean that I'll put that on other people. And I'm very much in the idea of embracing that it's a completely evolving genre now, I think, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have a few examples of the book, and we can have a look into the book in a second. I just wanted to share a little bit some images about the behind the scenes and the production of the book, which was really amazing.
I was quite envious of you for this one, because I think Alistair, I don't know if Alistair, with your book, if you've actually, are you going to be on site, Alistair, for your book getting printed at all?
I'm not going to be on site. No. All the best we're managing is wet proofing.
Yeah, so that was the same for me. And in some respects, I kept asking if I could go, and I think Darren and myself we either couldn't find the time, or it was just more. It's ridiculous saying you can't find the time, because it's like, you know, a really important thing to do, but. Darren just kept saying to me, wet proofs will be sufficient, but it is nice to turn up and actually see the thing.
Yeah. It's not only about seeing, it's also for me about learning. And so I've learned so many things in these couple of days. So that was an amazing team at Printer Trento, and it was really amazing. Color proofs, for example, and we had, with some pages, we had quite a difficult time. And so I'm so super happy that I was able to draw from their experience. And sometimes, for example, which you see on the second image in the first row, the second image in the first row, yeah. So we needed to shift some CMYK values for some lines or some areas on some pages, and which made it extremely difficult. I don't want to go behind all the problems and issues, but color proof is really an exciting process, and I've learned a lot. And everyone who's creating a book should participate in it. And it was an amazing process and learning for me.
It's really interesting that you're using the same printer as both Bruce and I are. Bruce has used in his books, and I'm using for mine.
Yeah. So I was super excited about that, to see finally the print going. So after the proofs, and so that was a very emotional moment that I had in the process. Just wanted to share that with you. But you see also the problems and the issues that may evolve during the printing process.
Yeah.
So that was then after the first run, and so I was able to again observe the quality of the book. And if you told me before how many proofs there exist within a book production process, I would have probably given up. I stopped counting, but I guess that we have probably between 15 or 20 different proofs, and for different reasons, and which was also an amazing process for me.
Can I just interrupt there slightly? I'd like to ask Alistair, because I'm about 6 books in now or something, and I've kind of just wanting to ask Alistair about, it's his first book. What are what have been the exciting moments so far? Because I think I'd like to hear Rennie as well about that, about what have been the exciting parts of the book coming out for both of you.
Yeah, I'm just at the wet proof phase of Out of Darkness. And for me, I think it's that these things just don't exist until we make them exist.
Yep.
And the way I introduce it in the book text is it's not just the meaning of a life, it's a life of meaning. They mirror each other. They both give a voice to the meaning of your life, but they're also an expression of meaning. So it's this sort of it's a very symbiotic relationship between the product and the life that leads to the product. I can't wait to actually get one of the books in hand. That's going to be such an incredible thing.
So
finally do that.
I get that totally. For me, and I could hear that in Rennie's voice as well, saying how emotional he was when he saw them getting, because it's now turning him from this idea or this concept, this kind of intangible thing, to all of a sudden it's there. And I remember the first time that what happens for anybody who doesn't know this about book production is that you spend the money, you send them all this money, and you're sitting there thinking, oh God, and then the first thing that happens is that they send you like an empty book. Usually, well, in the process I've been involved in, they usually send you an empty book just to show you this is the kind of weight of the book, this is the size of the book, so you get a feel for it. And that at that point you're looking at it, you're thinking, well, okay. And then they send you the dust jacket. And when you get the dust, if you have a dust jacket, the first thing you do, they probably know this, is that everybody starts wrapping the dust jacket around this empty book. And it's the first inkling you get of this real thing.
Yeah.
And you start getting excited by that. And then when the proofs turn up, I've often found, for me, I can't judge the book based on the proof, the content, basically the actual printed pages. They send you those at some point. And I'm trying to, it always seems to be like a very different thing once it's actually put in to the cover. And I can't even explain that. I've actually been quite despondent at times when they've actually sent me the content. This is the actual final internal pages. And then somehow when it turns up and it's actually got the cover on it and everything, all of a sudden I'm really, really happy. But you go through these kind of plateaus of like just getting a hint of the book and a glimmer of this is the real thing. And it's just like it's coming out of this, behind this curtain a bit, and it's becoming gradually more and more real. And so that's kind of what I was hearing in Rennie talking about, when you could actually see the pages getting printed out. And I didn't know that you were just at the wet proof thing. So you've still got quite a lot to look forward to, I think, Alistair, I would say.
Yeah, more bills. That's what I'm looking forward to.
No, but just really, really exciting times. And also when you get the first, when you send you a box of the first sample copies, that's just bizarre. It's such a weird
I am
thing.
super excited, and I don't know if Renee feels like this, but it's interesting that he's described this as the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, because I think a lot of us feel that what next? There's almost that void in front of you, as if, well, this is such a meaningful body of work that what else have I got to give? Is this going to be the most significant thing I ever do in my life? And it's already, I know, sort of 6 months down the line after finishing writing the book, that this is the end of the beginning for me. I mean, I'm already have new concepts and new projects that I'm working on that are so unrelated to the previous things as well. So
I would say that now that Rennie, well, both of you now once you've got this book out now, it's actually here, Rennie, and you now realize you've done it. You could actually do this. This is not just something that is just an idea. It's actually really there. And Alistair's it sounds to me like Alistair's getting there too with that. Once you've got the first book done, it's almost like you kind of go, yep, what else can I do? It's that there's a bit of that to the whole thing. And I really do like books about this whole kind of idea of, it's just a way of just, I don't know if it's just about putting align under a group of work, or if it's just about trying to collate it in some way, because there's something, even this, curating work to put in an exhibition or something's the same difference almost. But when you put all that together, maybe this has been some sort of therapeutic thing, kind of a bit of therapy in some respects, to put all this together and collate that for you. And similarly, I would say that Alistair's book as well, both Alistair and myself, we're commercial guys in the way that we're trying to make a living. But, so that there's that aspect to it, but it still is a very much of a baby thing, doing a book. It becomes a very personal thing. And I would say that even like 2 years ago, probably the book that Alistair's got designed right now, he probably couldn't have even imagined that 2 or 3 years ago. I would say it's probably, I'm assuming this, I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, Alistair, but it was for me. Just they seem to take a life of their own.
Well, I think and this is the key thing, I think, and René's done an unusual thing here, because his book is a celebration of other people.
Yes, it's a very
which is quite a different thing for most photographers to do. To me, it seems like an exceptionally altruistic thing to do. Whereas, like you say, when you're a commercial photographer, there's that sort of necessary self-obsessed, that you're having to promote.
Well, it's kind of there. I mean, you're aware of it, but I still find that your book just seems to sort of take on, like, you're not really worried about, you don't even think about whether people are going to buy it. You just end up sort of just being driven to do the thing that it just seems to want itself to be done. It almost tells you what it needs.
So René, here's a question for you, which is, what would you change if you were to do it again?
That's a difficult one. Make it much smaller. And
but Bruce and me.
but giving the same space to each individual, I think this is still very important. And but maybe thinking in terms of more like a series of books. And that for sure. I would have also liked to have more diversity and look into a little bit more the challenges of each individual artist. For example, I was talking with Thomas Heaton, with Nigel Denson, and also with you, Alistair, a little bit about the pressure that the social life creates for you as content creators. So you are not only photographers and artists, but you're also content creators. And I was very interested and curious to learn how that pressure influences your artistic voice. And so I would like to have a little bit more space for that. I've also been thinking about maybe I add a podcast or something like that, where I can continue with each individual artist talking about the book and their intents. So there are many ideas, but I have to say that in the end, and this is super rare for me, and I'm very happy with what the book is. And when I got the book, I felt that, okay, this is like I always wanted to have the book. And so this is, for me, it's really a delight, and I'm really enjoying the book.
Well, that's huge.
I think that,
and yeah, I don't think you could have a better outcome than that, really. And I think this is part of the problem these days, is that there is so much external pressure to please other people. Popularity is a byproduct of financial success in any art form. I mean, you can have an opening night at a theater, and if no one turns up, it closes the next day. They cut their losses immediately. Whereas with photographers, and I mean, Bruce and I have made a lifestyle choice to embrace the creative life and to embrace the educational life, where we're hoping to help other people with
I would definitely say that probably certainly the first one or two books, definitely the first one, I did it with the full anticipation that I was going to make a loss. I just had to do it. And I was wanting to know this about René as well. I got the feeling with René, this is just something he had to do. And the fact he wants to give us money for it, which I just don't get personally. I think he should just keep it himself, because he's probably, I don't know how much the book cost you to print. I imagine it's taking quite a lot of money. And I would have suggested that you recoup that first. But if you aren't, I think it's probably a nice thing just to be able to, you just wanted to do it, and that's it, you know. And I think that usually book number one is usually very much a case of a burning desire that you just want to do it. And even if nobody buys it but your mum, you just have to do it. And it has this momentum of its own, I think, when it starts to get going, really.
You know,
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, what I was just going to say here is that, I mean, you know, there's 30,000 people that are subscribed to this YouTube channel these days, which of course we're super grateful for because it makes us our living. But this is why I wanted to do this video, was because, you know, it comes across as if we're constantly trying to sell things to people. But in any market, something of value, it is being sold because it has value. You know, we go into stores and bookstores and all sorts of different shops that sell us things. My house is surrounded by things I've bought, whether it's arts or more functional things or more day-to-day things, and we buy them because they add value to our lives or they make something easier. And we think nothing of going out and buying a musical instrument or going out and buying a new frying pan or a wok or a better fridge freezer. We do this on a daily basis because it helps nourish our life. And when it comes to art and when it comes to producing a product that is art-based or philosophy-based or self-improvement-based or self-development-based or focused, part of the thing that allows me to sleep at night is I believe that what I produce adds value to people on their own development and on their own journey to improve their relationship with the landscape, improve their relationship with themselves, because that's ultimately what art does. It's a catalyst and a metaphor for our relationship with ourselves. And one of the things I really admire about this book, and one of the reasons I want to promote it to the best of my ability to the audience that I have available to me, is because it offers value. You know, there's nowhere else in the world where you're going to be able to pick up a book that has 31 artists' opinions about the creative process and the meaning of art, because these are the questions we should be asking ourselves if we want to make art in the first place. If you don't know the answer to the question, why am I doing this? Then don't be surprised if you end up with something you don't understand or doesn't satisfy you. You know, it's understanding what these parameters are that give value to the act of creativity. And this is why I think, you know, you should really be applauded for what you've done here, is because it's an incredibly altruistic thing, packaged beautifully in a way that you have gained a huge amount of insight at the same time. You know, you've sucked in all of this incredible inspiration from a hugely diverse set of artists. So, you know, I can understand there's a huge amount of value to yourself in this. But as Bruce says, you know, I know how much I'm spending to produce the book that I'm doing, and it's over £40,000 to print 1,000 books. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a chunk of change. You know, it's a lot of money. So, you know, it's a huge investment to do this, and I'm sure you're paying more because your book's twice the size of my book.
I think things have changed a wee bit as well. I remember when we did the first book, it was a lot less than that, but you know, print prices have gone up.
Oh, it's insane,
astronomically in the last six months or a year. Yeah. Really.
I've just realized that when Trento told me that the price of my book was going up because there was a shortage of fine art paper, now I know where it was being used.
Well, in fact, I think it is the worst year to self-produce a book. And the prices for our book, they went up until 40% on average on the paper, for example. Then we needed to postpone the print because the paper was not available. So there was no stock of paper. And then all the international crises, the challenges, they kicked in. We have lots of logistical problems and delivery problems. And so it is an incredible, difficult process and very complex. And I'm super happy that I have a friend of mine, Sebastian Cardouf, who's helping me out on all the things I'm not interested in. So I'm the kind of the artistic director of the book, and he's managing everything else, and which I'm super thankful to have. I just wanted to add something to you, Alistair. In your last video, you said, "Are you enjoying it?" So you offered one question to your audience. And I just told last week to my team, every year before Christmas, I'm giving a Christmas talk. And I told my team that I believe that happiness is the new productivity. And because once you're happy, then I think that money follows happiness. So if you do what you like doing, then you always find an audience who's interested in that. And it's just a matter of time and patience. And so I didn't look at the economical side of the book at all from the beginning, and even not now. So it's nice to hear if we sell some books, but that was not the intent. The most important thing was the happiness and to have the book finally. And just to give you a few examples of what the book is all about. So this is chapter 4. This is about Alistair Benn. You'll find a short description about the artist and the URL to his personal webpage. You'll find some warm-up questions, which give you a kind of a boxing thing. And Bruce actually replied in his text that he doesn't like boxes, and I totally agree. And why should
I don't even remember that either. Sorry.
Why should we be boxed into a category called landscape photography when we are just photographers? And but sometimes it's kind of helping to get an idea of where the photographers are. So this is an example of one of the pages. And so questions we asked, for example, in the book are, why do you photograph? What makes a good photograph? What's your subject matter? And what makes you probably click in order to make the image? How do you describe your visual language? How has it changed over time? And many, many other questions and personal stories. And we combine that with photographs from the artists. So this is another example of Alistair's text. And one highlight that I just put out of the chapter with Alistair was that based on the question, what's your subject matter? Alistair said, I have moved away from subject-based photography since around 2017. I don't see the world in terms of things. I see it as the distribution of feelings and how I recognize my own inner landscape out there in the world. So how do you feel about that, Alistair?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's an evolution, and this is one of the beauties, I think, about the creative process, is that it's a snapshot in time. It's not designed as a constant. My opinion about my own creativity isn't carved in stone. And I can agree with a substantial amount of that statement, but it would probably change if I wrote it today.
Sure.
And so not because it's evolved, and it's more how, and I think that's such an important part of creativity, is that, and Bruce knows this from how photography evolved during the 70s and 80s. Everyone who was teaching photography was teaching how to make a photograph. It was going to a certain place to make a certain photograph in a certain way, using a certain shutter speed and a certain aperture to create or recreate a style of photograph. And where we're at now is we have so much more that we can do. And I think the best teachers out there are exploring, well, what else can be done? How else can I express myself? And this is why I don't see my photography, I see my photography very much as autobiographical, is that I'm exploring emotional aesthetics, or the aesthetics of the engagement with a certain landscape. It's not explicitly about the landscape. I did a fellowship for the Royal Photographic Society last year, and I had to change my statement of intent to shoehorn it into what they wanted from me as a landscape photographer. My work was supposed to express something about the landscape, whereas most of my landscape photography expresses more about me than it does about the landscape. And that's not egocentric. It's just art is expressive.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that, them asking that question says a lot more. You know, the question has its own questions. You know, there's so much built into that question already. It's made a lot of assumptions about things, and I think things about creativity is it's all completely fluid. And when Rennie was talking about Ruben Wu, for example, he's a musician, he's an environmental artist, industrial designer, a bunch of different things. And I would imagine that he would probably even say that he would just call himself a creative person.
Yeah.
I would say, and this idea of boxing ourselves in a little bit, although Rennie was saying that I was having a problem with this. I understand that for the format of a book, that's fine. It's a difficult thing because I think what you want to do is just keep everything fluid, and similarly with the written word as well. I find that, you know, you can write something on your blog and then 2 years later somebody's picking you up about something you said 2 years ago. And the thing is, you're saying, yeah, I give myself permission to change my mind, and I give myself permission to that's what I felt that day. And there's something odd about things being written down, or this idea about permanence. And I think with in my view, the creative arts is a way of just remembering that everything's transient. We live in this illusion of everything being permanent, you know, and everybody talks about how they've got this hard drive or whatever, they can store their images forever, or they can print it on a pigment ink thing and it's going to be there for the next 200 years. Where the truth of the matter is that I reckon if I die before my sisters die, when they come around to clear my house out, I think everything that I've got will just get thrown in a skip. So, and I think this is very freeing to sort of just assume that everything you're doing is fluid and it can just change all the time, and it's not forever.
But this
When
is
you
why
understand that,
this is why the experience has to be more important than the product.
yes,
You know, our relationship with the experience has to be paramount, because if it's all about the product and all about our legacy, then we're actually missing the living. And that to me seems like the most important thing. And I think this is something that's common in so many of the people who you've asked questions to, is that we have a deep love of experiences. And then we have a deep love of articulating our diverse perspectives about experiences and encouraging other people to have more fulfilling lives. You know, as I alluded to earlier on, I have an allergy, a real revulsion to the concept of being average. You know, we should be aiming for the stars, and I think this is one of the great things. I mean, Bruce knows what a fan I am of his work. I'm such a lover of Bruce's work. We've got prints on the wall, we've got books in the bookcase. You know, we sit and we enjoy Bruce's work on a regular basis. I look at it every single day on the walls of our house, and it adds value to our lives, and that is the artistic gift.
so I like that too, Alistair. I've got lots of prints and stuff at home too. I've got a Paul Kenny, and I've got a couple of John Blakemores that I bought when I was at the On Landscape conference about 5 years ago or so. When he was down there, I made a little pact with myself: if John Blakemore's turning up, I'm definitely buying some of his black and white tulips. And I think there's something in I think we should all be buying other people's work as well. That's what we should be doing as photographers and things.
Absolutely agree. And
yeah,
that's the print that I have on my wall right left to me, and the painted tree from Bruce.
Oh, you have that one, yeah.
And I have also two Paul Kennys, and it's beautiful to be surrounded by the work of others, and this gives a lot of creative inspiration, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose for me it's more about individuality. I just, you know, I don't know about the excellence thing. I think I'm a control freak. We were making a little joke before this conference call about some of us might have a little bit of a control freak aspect to our personalities, and I definitely think that's in me. So I think that there's probably something that pushes me on to try and do the best I can do. And I'm not entirely convinced sometimes whether that's a healthy thing. I think it's a mixture of both. It can be a healthy thing because you need some sort of drive, but it can also, if it's unchecked, it could probably wreak havoc with your own confidence as well, I suppose.
Well, that's what art
judgment.
is also. It's also a reflection or an articulation of your acceptance of those
Your
attributes.
acceptance. See, that's exactly what I feel. And I had I couldn't remember what I'd written in the book here, so I had a look at read of it today. We were making jokes earlier on that the chances were that I was going to open the book and go straight to my section, which I did, and I was reading my own words, and I was really interested to read them again because with no memory of writing them, and I'm trying to figure out how much of this still resonates now, or what came across. Got the feeling that I was just trying to basically just say everything's okay, it doesn't matter, it's just do what you do, enjoy it, and express yourself, and just try not to box yourself in too much. That's what I was trying to say, I think.
I think this is also the beauty of the book. So you can see, I just wanted to juxtapose a little bit on this idea of why do you photograph. So Alistair was emphasizing the emotional part, the part of the inner landscape. And Bruce is actually emphasizing here that I just go out with it and respond. And so ours is not to ask questions. I think it's also super important. In a second, I'll show you a statement by Rafael Rojas, who also involves the mind. And so for him, it's also, he needs to be also rationally be inspired by an idea, by a project statement. And so that is so beautiful to see all the different accesses, the access points of each artist towards their work, I think.
Yeah, the one constant between all the photographers is that they're all different.
Yeah, exactly.
Rene, you know that Rafa and I are incredibly good friends, don't you? We go back a long, long way, Rafa and me. And Rafa and you guys go back a long way too, don't you?
Well, I've been talking to Raphael, I don't know if it's actually maybe even 15, 20 years, but it's a long time. And I keep bumping into him. In fact, I saw him 2 weeks ago in Edinburgh. He was here. I went for coffee with him.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, but the funny, we both turned up at the same creepy hotel in Snæfellsnes in Iceland one year. I walked. It was like The Shining, the movie, the snow blizzard. I got there with my friend and with two friends, and we walked into the hotel, and we were looking at each other, going, looks got a bit of a Shining vibe to it. And the next minute, Raphael walks in and he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, Bruce," he says, "this reminds me of The Shining." And it was just hilarious.
In Spain in May. Literally, I was just down at the beach, and the next minute I think, "Mr. Ben."
yeah. So yeah, I bumped into him a few times. Senja as well in Norway.
Wonderful guy.
And yeah, he's very expressive. He's got a lot to say, and I can never figure out if that's just a Spanish thing or not, because but he just has a lot to say about everything.
I think to be fair, he learned that from me.
It absolutely is. So Rafael he lives an hour away from me, and so we know each other well, and I consider him a friend. He's very inspirational. I'll get to an example from Rafael in a second. Before, I just wanted to show Paul Kenny, of course. And I think if you'll know anything about the story of the mapping, the strand line idea, and it is just very impressive the way Paul works and the way he puts the emphasis on the process. And so what you see here in that image are 16 small squares that he cut out of bottles that he found on his local beach. So bottles from 7-Up bottles, I think. And so he put kind of a copper ring, a rusted copper ring, rusted by the salt from the sea on top of that. And this is so inspirational. And what Paul talks about in the book is that he distinguishes between the optimizers and the makers. So the optimizers for him are the people who always go to the same iconic locations and try to get now the next better sunset and the aurora on top and the jumping dolphin in front of it. And so the makers are the one who are creating things, and he really believes in that, making art, and so I very much like that. So here,
I do too.
Yeah, quotes by Paul Kenny. "When does your own photograph makes you happy?" And he said, when I can create an image that is immediately beautiful and seductive, but contains complex thoughts and ideas that can slowly reveal themselves if the viewer works hard enough. I think that is a beautiful quote about art.
That last part of the sentence is so huge. If the viewer works hard enough, sometimes it's not us that needs to work harder, it's the viewer. And I think this is why photography books are so important, is that social media asks no questions. Scrolling an Insta feed or a Twitter feed or a Vero feed is an effortless, no commitment thing. Whereas spending 70, 80, 100, 150 pounds, 250 pounds on a fine art book is a commitment, and therefore we give it some more of our attention. It's like going to see my birthday's at the weekend, and we're going to the ballet in Glasgow on Saturday night, and we've spent big money on some tickets, and we're going to go and sit there and enjoy it, partly because of the commitment that we've made to go. You know, we are celebrating.
The time itself is a commitment as well. So, like, in my view, when somebody sits down with a book and actually gets involved in it, there's a different level. It's the same as putting an album on, a vinyl record or something. Putting a vinyl record on, the effort of going out to get it out of a sleeve and put it on the turntable, and that involves a sense of conviction or commitment to sit down and actually listen to it. And it's a very different experience from just like bunging on some MP3s and just rattling through different things and listening to a song for 10 seconds and on to the next one. And similarly,
Tinder of music.
Yes. And so with the book thing, as soon as it's in your lap and everything, you also see things in. I remember when I printed the first couple of books, I started getting emails from people saying, there's just so much more detail on the images. I've looked at these images for a long time on your website, and now they're in printed form, and I'm seeing so much more in the print. And I'm thinking, that's great. That sounds to me like that's somebody's been sitting there and they've been absorbed in it. And that's really what you want. And I do, apart from, thinking that books are a great thing, when you actually start looking through people's work in a printed medium, you do learn a lot from looking at it. You notice things in it, and I just think it's a little bit like when you're editing your own pictures on a computer screen. It's not quite the same as printing it out. When you print it out and you have to review it again, you see things in the print that you didn't see on the monitor. And so there's that aspect of it. So I think that's why books, for me, I still think they're extremely important.
I think it's all about the 3 A's. So the artist and the art itself and the audience. And so we can control a little bit ourselves and the art, but we cannot control the last step, the perception. And but what we can think about is that was also one question of the book, how we present our work and to the audience. And print is a form of presentation that shows a completely different level of experience, I think. Yeah, 2 more questions by Paul Kenny, and which I like a lot. The first one I quoted already in the beginning: why do you photograph? I don't like the term to photograph. It puts the medium before the message, and I think this is a super important one. And the second, what are the features defining a photograph to be part of a project? And of course, those are just extracts from his reply. But it is coherence in the visual motives and mood and consistency of the ideas. And so I like that because it is super short, but very much to the point, and kind of containing all the important elements of a project.
I think coherence is a big thing. Just clarity of message and what you're doing. I don't think most of us, when we're creating work, would not. I don't think we're really consciously aware of what we're trying to do until we've actually finally got it. And when we finally honed it and got it to that sort of there's something clear in the message there, then, but it takes steps to get there, I think.
Would you mind unsharing the screen for a moment, Rene? Just
Sure.
see each other a little more. I've got a question for you. How much of your motivation for doing this project was anger and to provoke and to challenge? I think most of us in the education stroke artistic medium these days, a lot of our work comes from a place of frustration and anger and pushing back against the status quo and that sort of societal herding of we all need to be the same and manageable and sort of it's they don't want the people at the edges of the bell curve. They're trying to crush everyone into the middle. So how much of this was a provocation to say, well, there are alternatives?
I mean, that's a good point. So the point with the distribution is I'm a mathematician, and so I can tell you that something I'm telling my students all the time is that the truth and the beauty always lies at the edges of the distributions. And we really need to understand the edges. And if we want to normalize society, and we are cutting off the progress, we are cutting off the nerds, the ones who are thinking out of the box. And so for me, the edges are super important.
That's very interesting. I like that. I like that a lot, René. That's very interesting.
But isn't that our point? That's our purpose. That is our purpose as artists, is to be on the fringes. Our purpose as artists isn't to be in the middle. And there is no average. That's the beauty of this project, is that there isn't an average. You can look at 31 different artists and suppose that's homogenize.
Yeah, I suppose that's where I'm coming from about, like, if you think about the social media algorithms, is that they tend to give you more of what you look for. So if you like fairly...
that explains my browsing history.
Well, but, I do think it promotes things that are kind of fairly safe. And if those things that trend are a very interesting thing, because usually they're not too different that people don't get them, but they're different enough that they know that it's different from everything else they're looking at. And they're kind of an interesting mix, those ones, because they're not too far of a leap that people just kind of go, I just don't know where this is coming from. And the thing about if you are somebody who's got a real individual taste in what you're doing, you're just going to get buried. You're just not going to come up in those algorithms. And I think that's a very, very hard thing. So this whole thing about individuality and then living on the fringe thing, that's what I pick up from what René's saying, these kind of outliers or these kind of edge things. I think that's absolutely true. And I think things are often the things that sort of push us forward in art or society or anything usually come from the kind of unusual people in some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, going back to René on this, because I know that Bruce and I have just successfully quashed your answer. Going back to the original question, was that part of your motivation to produce the book?
So there is a twofold reply to that, I think. Personally, I'm a very calm person and who doesn't want to provoke. And I'm not aware really of anger or these negative emotions. No, that's not true. So I'm aware, but maybe it's not a very important part of my own personality. So it wasn't my intent to provoke. However, I would say it was one of the triggers that I wanted to say, okay, that we have to stand up and we have to show there's also a different truth. So it is more the trigger rather than that I have an anticipation of the consequence. So it is unintentional, I would say, but it is definitely the trigger, if that makes any sense.
That's the curious thing in the fact that the labels that we use, and photographers are very good at labeling, and this is where the statement that was on the screen earlier about, we don't need to label, landscape photographers. We're not landscape photographers. I'm just a photographer. In fact, I'm not even a photographer. I'm a guitar player. I make photos with my eyes when I'm out in the landscape that are perfect without the tool. That's where the barrier starts, is when we start having to deal with the tool. So I think it's interesting the fact that a byproduct of your intent here is provocative. It is challenging. It is the antithesis of social media. It is I don't want to talk about setting a standard because that implies that, we're somehow in an elevated position. And I don't think any of us believe that deep in our hearts. I think most of us just think we're regular people who have chosen photography as a way to express ourselves.
I have difficulty with this anger thing, Alistair. With Rennie's book anyway, I definitely think that this is just, I think it's fair to think there's an alternative thing out there and you just want to express it. And I don't know about feeling any sense of kind of negativity or something like that about or trying to prove. I'm just curious about your question about that.
I think part of that, I think, maybe I'm just a very angry person. I've worked for many, many years to have a better relationship with myself. That's part of my creative process is to be able to express all the different facets of who I am as a person and to rationalize them and to externalize.
So I thought you were coming at it from the point of view that provoking and challenging, I think, are healthy things and they're valid things. Similarly, difficult images are good. This idea of everything being calming or pleasing or lovely and beautiful is fairly one-dimensional. Creating difficult, fractured work. There's music that I like to listen to that's extremely difficult. And there's times, so I think that's where I'm coming from. I'm trying to figure out the motivation for your question, because I think that's what I'm picking up from you, is that you're talking about there's all this kind of broader. I think most people assume that you're always doing work because it's pleasing or it's nice or it's pretty, and it doesn't have to be.
Well, that was my point, was the fact to provoke that standardization isn't necessarily the best path. Was my point. I think to challenge people to be themselves, or to challenge, because I don't believe you can truly be a creative person until you're creating. And if we look at any definition of creativity, it's to produce something that has not happened until you did it. So there's an essence of that sort of spontaneous genesis happening. And so I think that was more my point, and it sounds from Rene that there wasn't a huge amount of motivation in that regard consciously. However, the product could be construed as such, that it is challenging the status quo, it is challenging the concept that diversity is better than homogeny. And that as he started his answer, the fringes are where we find the interesting things. And the irony of that is that Galen Rowell in 2001 or whatever wrote an article basically saying, look to the margins, look to the fringes, look to the boundaries, and that was more a sort of a physical reality of look to where
he was fantastic writer. I remember one of his articles, he was talking about HDR before HDR turned up, because he died in 2001, and he was just talking about how to just from memory, vaguely, it was along the lines of that the perfectly exposed photograph where you can see right into the shadows and everything is just a bit soulless, in the way that when you have parts of a picture that you can't see into them, that conveys mystery, because it's primal animal, the primal instincts is you don't go into the dark forest. And similarly with a scary horror movie, when you hear the scary noise downstairs, nobody goes downstairs to see what's down there. And so there's that thing about things and images sometimes need to be left unsaid or deliberately inconclusive. All this stuff is quite important, I think, and even sometimes just to not even know why you've done what you've done, you've just done it, and maybe later on you'll figure out why you did it.
Everything Galen wrote was from the perspective of a Velvia shooter, though.
Well, probably yes. Well, he was, yes. But I thought his comments about, he was talking about before, there's going to come a time where you'll be able to perfect images so much that they can border on becoming soulless. and this over control about what you're doing as well. And that's, in my view, I think that this whole creative thing is all about, and to a lot of degree, letting go and just, it is what it is. Sometimes, that was what you did that day, or the imperfections in the image is just leaving them there, that you can, analysis paralysis, we start perfecting every micro pixel in the picture or whatever. And yet sometimes, some people who've got a real skill for that can just push that image on in a way that just makes it look really interesting. So it's all very, very fluid, I think. I haven't really given it much thought. It's just when you asked that question about anger and everything like that, I just thought, I've always looked at the creative arts as just a way of trying to get away from all the kind of stuff.
Yeah, but at
that
the
I'm
same time,
dealing with.
I think the point I'm making is that as a commercial artist, as a commercial photographer, as a commercial educator, you're in an arena of competition. You've got no choice. You're part of the package. You are a member of the educational fraternity of landscape photographers. And I think it is common for a certain amount of frustration, or because if you don't play the game, you're not in the game. And this is a choice that you've made, is to detach yourself from social media to a certain extent, and the competitive nature of photography, to retain that creative integrity. Whereas I think I'm more aggressively challenging in my approach by saying, right, let's look at these questions, and I've got the platform.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm picking up. Yeah. It's just I've never even considered that they actually even exist until you were today. Literally, honestly, I've never really thought about has there been any kind of frustration or anger. I think of everything that
I'm really envious now. In fact, I'm angry at myself.
Well, maybe I'm just full of self-deception, because I think that's very possible. Just I would definitely agree with you. One of the reasons why I came away from all the kind of social media platforms was I didn't find it very I didn't find it very healthy for me. And I just felt that somehow it was distracting me, and I was starting to worry about things that I felt that it was. Sometimes you need a sounding board. You just need somebody else to tell you, does this stuff really matter? And you think, actually, no. What really is the core of it? The core is that you're on your own path, and you're doing the thing that you're doing, and just moving forward with it, that sort of thing. But I can understand your question to Rennie there about, but just simply because we're talking about the fact that in some respects, this book feels like it's an antidote to certain things that are happening in society or whatever. But I don't think that's really the main drive. Anyway,
I don't think so. That was not my intent, and I think it's also a much healthier way of living if we are unintentional, if we don't think about the perception of something. But I'm never thinking about how my work is going to be perceived. I always try to give the best and be authentic and show myself, show my personality. I put my heart out into everything I do, and I try to be the person who I am, the personality who I am, and hope that everything I do shows kind of the person who I am. That is important for me. And if this doesn't work, if the perception is very negative, okay, then it's negative, but at least it's authentic.
No, and that was not my intention. It was not an observation that feeling of the book was provocational. It's just that from my point of view, I think we're in this situation where the act of creativity is more important than the product. And the more we focus on the product, the less connected we are to the experience, the less connected we are to the more therapeutic nature of art as an act. So for me, the act of making photographs that are fearful or anxious or somehow challenging is an externalization of physical attributes, and that act is valuable to me, as is the act of making aesthetic beauty.
It's really interesting, Alistair. It's an avenue that you're obviously exploring, and I haven't really given it much thought, to be honest. And it's probably there, but I've just not been consciously aware of it.
We'll get together again for a vision.
Well, yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I'm sort of wondering about this too. Well,
think
I don't know. I think in some respects, sometimes I just don't want to know. Just about myself personally,
You
I
don't
just
want to know the demons inside. That's
absolutely. Well, there's that. Yeah. And I understand that as an educator and things. You know, you're maybe I'd certainly trying to come at it from the point of view of understanding what drives people and trying to look for those kind of things that give you an insight into where you're going with what you're doing and developing.
And this is why, you know, and I keep coming back to this, the book is unique. You know, the book is truly unique because it's not just one opinion. It's not just one platform. It's not just one perspective. It's 31 perspectives. And each of us has our own methodology and our own desires and our own fears and anxieties and ways of articulating ourselves and using photography for different things. And there may well be some common ground. And as a mathematician, I'm sure René has mapped it out, you know, to find, well, where is the common ground, you know, and he's using it for his own development. You know, this is his master plan.
Well, I'm always very interested in sort of scientific people or academic people that are involved in the arts, because in some respects, I often feel that they're kind of at polar opposites in some ways. And I don't know why I think that, but I just do. And so I'm quite interested. And then when I looked at René's website, I thought there's definitely an artist there, you know, and
100%. I love René's work.
Yeah. So
the only thing I'm disappointed in is that he's not in the book.
Well, actually, no. So this is a question I do have. I don't know if you can see that that picture there.
No. You've got this virtual background on. So
all right, okay. Well, it's basically the first picture when you open the book. I was trying to figure. I know it's in Iceland and it's in the interior of Iceland, René, and it's the Black Desert. And there was no. I guess you don't have to spell things out to people, but it's also used for the sort of iconography at the front page and I gathered when I had to bury around the book and look around to see whose picture it was, I thought it was yours, and I found at the very end in the tiny text it just mentioned that it's your picture, and I wanted to ask why specifically this picture.
That's a very good question. So first of all, I wanted to give stage to other artists. So this book was not about me, and it would have been just not right putting myself at the same level than the artist that I invited for the book. So it was a very clear decision for me to putting myself out and even downplaying my own role. So you see just a very short description at the end of the book about me. And so that was everything about the downplay. Why that image? So there are some personal reasons for why I took the image, and that mean a lot to me. And one substantial reason is that what I really like about that image is that you see something which is also part of a project where nature transitions from black ashes of the volcano into kind of a new life and the plants. So it is a transition that is actually mirrored through that image. In the image, you see the small plants, the small seeds of plants in the front.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that transition, that something gives life to something else, that is the big metaphor for me of the book. So that all the artists, we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. And so it is about the giants who are seeding kind of something into the world, and with the idea to plant something else for the others. And so that is the metaphor that I'm using.
One final thing I'd like to mention, given the fact that we're now over 2 hours, and anyone who's still watching deserves some kind of award, is that from my own experience as an educator and some of the people I've been mentoring over the last couple of years, the work that they're producing is as good, if not better, than many well-known photographers. And the fact, any comment that your work is not of value within the greater picture of contemporary art and photography is not valid, and it's another label that should be ignored. I admire massively the altruism of your project and the downplaying of your own personal role, and I think that's hugely admirable. But don't mistake that for lack of value of the work that you produce. Because I'm like Bruce, is that having been to your website and I know your work on social media, but it's as good as anybody else's. So you don't believe that it's not. And I think that's a hugely important part of the creative process, is that if you're going to push the boundaries of your own creativity, you cannot start using comparative language, because comparative language in its very essence is going to be self-deprecating. Because it's the only way we can function, is to say, well, I'm not as good as that person.
Thanks, I very, very much appreciate your words. And I have to say that the book is dedicated to all the artists not being part of the book. And so that was my idea, because I didn't want to leave any regret on others not being chosen for the book. That was a very individual project. And maybe in the second version, I don't know, I'll add more. And but there's so much creativity out in the world and so much quality, and that I really appreciate. And so that's the reason why I dedicated the book towards for all the other artists not being part of the book.
100%. Bruce, any closing thoughts?
I just would agree with you very much, Alistair, about this idea about I see people all the time. I think they're really great at what they do. For very, very talented people. And you and I just made the mistake of actually believing everybody else that we should make a living out of it. That's the difference, So, and I don't know, just somehow people are put on a bit of a pedestal when they've got a little bit of a profile or something. And but I think there's most people in general, even if they do know they've got something going with their work, because I think they do when they're good at what they're doing. I think they know they've got something, but it takes them a while to actually get comfortable with actually being admitting it and actually getting rid of the imposter syndrome thing. That's a common thing for everybody, and it happens. Doesn't matter who they are. They all go through that. Everybody goes through it, and at some point you just get comfortable and confident with what you're doing. And if you get a compliment, it's it's nice. But if you get ultimately, it doesn't really change what you're doing, because you're just doing you, and that's it really. So I totally get what you're saying about René's work as well, I think. And I would also say that I would imagine if I'd done the book, I would have found it very difficult putting myself in it, because I would have felt like I was being slightly egotistical. So I can totally understand why René didn't put himself in it. And I think it's a nice touch that he put that picture in. Yeah. It made me question it. Because I was wondering, where's that picture from and why? And I had to dig around for it. And finally, as well, I would like to say I think I got a very clear. I know René anyway, but just reading the text at the introduction, it was very clear about it's a fairly giving project, and the fact that he wants to pay us and not pay himself is outrageous. And as I said earlier on, I would personally be, and I know Alistair's up for this as well, just you can have my share and use it, and for the next book. And don't make the book about me or Alistair next time. Make it about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And obviously, we're 2 hours deep into a fairly intimate conversation, really, because we didn't come into this with a script or a pre-visualization of what we wanted to achieve, because we believed in our ability to talk spontaneously and creatively about things that we're passionate about. But I would urge people to buy this book, not to just support René and for him to recoup the insane amount of money that he spent on this project, but to gain value from the content. Because it's only through the immersion in that content that we can actually understand that our own perspectives are more valid than we believe them to be, because you're looking at a cross section of 31, not random, but a small percentage of creative people out there producing contemporary work. you only have to look at the diversity present in the book to appreciate that your diversity as a creative person is just as valid as ours. You know, because Bruce and me and Rene and Mark and Raphael and all the others who are represented in the book, we share certain attributes, but we equally have massively divergent attributes as well. And this is what creativity in the arts is a celebration of diversity. And that, I think, is just the sort of perfect summary for what the book represents. So I just want to thank Rene personally for putting it together and herding 31 very, very anarchic cats over a number of years to actually
definitely
product. And no one's going to be disappointed with the product. So thank you, Rene, for your dedication to art, really. And yeah, it's an honor to just be part of this conversation.
Thanks so much, and I'm really I'm pleased and of all your kind words. And I have to say it was an incredible, enjoying process, and talking to 31 personalities. It has not been always easy the process, I have to say.
I mean, spell checking Bruce's work would be challenging.
but I'm really enjoying myself a lot to talk to people with edges, and so it's the same what I said before with the truth about where we are as society lies at these edges, and finding these characters, this personality. That made me really go on with the book. And so I'm really pleased and thankful that you invited me. You can buy the book at voiceoftheice.com and online. And so we have excluded it so far from Amazon and other places. If you want to know why, we can talk about that in a different session. And very complex process, but you'll find everything online. And if you have any questions, you can also contact me directly. So thanks a lot, Alistair. Thanks a lot, Bruce. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
And thanks,
Bruce. Welcome.
It's
thanks very much, Rene.
It's a pleasure to talk to Bruce.
Yeah. Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, very, very nice conversation. And I'm still can't get over all the sand dunes behind Rene.
Yeah, we need to have a group mix. We need to get together in like Abu Dhabi.
Exactly.
I can tell you a little bit about the story of that image, and because this is really also, it was my first intentional image, I would say. You can see, let me see that side. There's a dead tree actually here.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And here on that side are the living camels, but the camels, they are walking out of the frame. Yeah. So they're walking away from the dead tree. And so for me, this image is about a triangle between the dead tree, the camels who are walking out of the image, and the viewer. And so the viewer can make a decision for himself if he wants to stay or if he wants to leave. And so life is everything about decisions. And so that image is about decisions for me.
God, man, I feel really shallow now. Wonderful. Well, listen, it's a real pleasure talking to both of you, and hopefully this video is going to inspire a few people to pick up a copy of the book for themselves, and hopefully improve their relationship with themselves and the landscape. So thank you both again. Thank you very much.
No worries. You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.